Hi, and welcome to this week's Intentional Wealth Update with Morton Brown Family Wealth. I am Katie Brown, and I am super excited to have Jonathan Kerstetter with me today. So, Jonathan is the newest member to our team. He started about 3 months ago, and he was hired as our financial planning strategist. He is another certified financial planner on our team, and he has a great depth of experience, really focused in on the financial planning aspects of client relationships. And so, welcome, John. Happy to have you today.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here also and look forward to working with the clients in the future.
So, we thought what might be a good conversation for today is to really talk about Roth IRA conversions and to walk through what that is. There's been a lot of headlines recently about why now might be a good time for a conversion. So, we kind of wanted to crack that open and talk through the differences between different types of tax structures of accounts and maybe some pros and cons of each of them and why a Roth account specifically might be good to fit into the mix of your balance sheet. So, with that in mind, John, why don't you give us some background on the different types of investment accounts out there, the different buckets?
Sure. So the main three types are tax advantage accounts, which usually known as taxable accounts. And the big difference there is the tax structure. They're not taxed as ordinary income, it's taxed as capital gains, and those can be short term or long term. And then the next bucket would be tax deferred accounts, and that would be a traditional IRA. They're pre taxed. So whenever you pull money out, it's taxed as ordinary income. And the other big caveat there is they're tax deferred. So you pull it out at the end when you start taking distributions, and there's no capital gain distributions along the way. And then the final bucket is Roth IRAs, and those are considered post tax contributions. When you go to take distributions out in retirement, they're tax free.
Right.
So when you kind of put all three of those different buckets together, you get what's called tax diversification.
Yeah, that's a good point. And figuring out that right blend for each family in their financial plan is really important. When you think about the contributions to the tax deferred or the tax free account, I think sometimes there's confusion. People are used to getting a tax deduction when they make a 401k contribution. What are the benefits now to the different buckets versus the benefits later?
That's a great point, Katie. On a traditional IRA, typically when you contribute, like I said, it's pre tax money. So, say if you in 2022 you max out at $6,000, you contribute that into your traditional IRA, you can get up to a $6,000 tax deduction on your 2022 taxes. So that's the big benefit there that you get immediately in this tax year. Then you look at comparison to a Roth IRA. If you do that same $6,000, you do not get that tax deduction, but you get that benefit when you start taking distributions out of that Roth IRA in retirement.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is subject to income limitations. We're not going to get into kind of the nuanced details of that. And if you do have any granular questions about what it means from a tax perspective, just a reminder to pull in your accountant and to make sure that your advisor and your accountant are working together to figure out that true tax implication there. But high level, yes, it is important for people to understand. On one side, they could have a tax deduction up front, but then the money comes out fully taxable later. But then on the Roth side, it's no deduction up front, but comes out tax free later. So that's what makes the Roth such an incredible vehicle because they grow tax free, they come out tax free later. Can you walk us through a Roth conversion? What is that process, and what are you trying to accomplish?
Sure. Basically, the mechanics of Roth conversion, say, for example, you have $1 million dollars in a traditional IRA, and basically all of your assets are in that one savings bucket. And then we go back to the term, the tax diversification. So, say for the next 5 years, you want to take $50,000 of that traditional IRA and convert it over to a Roth. So that 50,000 will be converted out of the traditional IRA into a newly established Roth IRA on your behalf. The tax consequence is you're going to have to pay ordinary income tax on that full $50,000 in 2022. But the benefit is when you go to pull it out and say 10 years, all that growth is going to be tax deferred, and everything after 5 years is going to be tax free, including earnings. So that's the big benefit.
Yeah. So you pick up all that essentially tax-free growth once you get beyond that 5 years. You touched on something that when you do that conversion, that does become taxable income to you. So you just need to make sure, once again, to kind of factor in what else is happening in your tax life. But it may be worth taking that tax bite now, specifically right now, with a year where markets we continue to be down. I'm going to say floating around 15% right now. I know it's kind of jumping around a little bit, but if market values are lower, then that money that you're converting, you're essentially converting less. And so the tax implications of that conversion could be less. And we know from history, oftentimes when there are market corrections like this, that there can be a snapback that's even more rapid. And so if you can pick up that upside in that future tax-free bucket, that could be a huge advantage right now. And even just thinking tax rates, what are your thoughts about kind of where rates are now, where they might be headed? How does that play into why timing something like this might be advantageous at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thought process is tax rates are going to go up in the future. I mean, it's not set in ink, it's more like writing in pencil. If you think your tax rate's going to be higher in the future versus now, it makes sense to look into doing a Roth IRA conversion strategy.
Even if there's not action taken right now to increase the tax rates or to, specify specific changes, there's still some sunsetting that's written into law. And so regardless, whether it's an intentional move or an unintentional move, I think we will see some changes to tax rates, 2026 or before. We don't know. And like you said, you never know exactly how that's going to land. But if we look at, once again, historical norms, we continue to be on the lower end of historical tax rates. And so the assumption that they will be going up at some point in the future is probably fair. To the degree, I don't know. So
No, that's a good point. I also want to circle back to something you said a couple minutes ago, Katie. So the Roth conversion can also be done with in-kind shares. And like Katie said, the market's about 15% down. So with asset prices being lower, it might make sense to look at moving in-kind shares from a traditional IRA to a Roth also.
mhm.
And you basically can get more, you can convert more with lower asset prices than you could if the value was at all-time highs like it was last year around this time.
So just to clarify, when you say in-kind shares, so if you have like 100 shares of Apple stock, you can move over 100 shares of Apple stock.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. John actually put together a great visual to bring this to life for us. So John, why don't you share that visual, because I think that it helps to show some of the benefits.
So this is a comparison chart here. On the left-hand side, you will see taxable asset bucket and then a tax deferred asset bucket, and zero assets in tax-free, which would be the Roth. And then what we did on the right-hand side comparison, we threw in a $50,000 Roth conversion for 5 years. So starting in 2022, for the next 5 years, they're going to convert $50,000 from their tax deferred asset. When I mean tax deferred, I'm talking about the traditional IRA, and they're going to convert that to tax-free asset bucket, which is the Roth IRA. And you can see that it's lowering, obviously, the tax deferred bucket by 50,000 per year, but it's also growing the tax-free assets. And you can see this is kind of tax diversification in the works here. We're not spending down the assets, we're just moving it from one bucket to another with some tax consequences. And I think the biggest thing here too is, I mean, filling up the tax-free asset bucket, but we're also reducing the tax deferred, and that's going to lower RMD amounts starting at age 72.
You're right. There are a lot of benefits there. So you can reduce those required minimum distributions, which helps to smooth out your taxes later. You create that tax-free bucket either for your own use Or another great use is that's the best possible asset for heirs to inherit, because especially with the changes in the distribution requirements for inherited IRAs where they have to be fully distributed within 10 years. If your children are inheriting assets and they are in their peak earning years, and now they have to spend down a large account on top of that, that can really compound. But if that large account is a tax-free bucket, obviously there's tax savings there and they have a lot more flexibility with those assets. And so your legacy assets could be that much stronger for the next generation or whoever the intended beneficiary is. Sometimes the bottom line number doesn't change a whole lot, but when you think about the use of those dollars and the tax dollars saved by creating that tax-free bucket, that can make a pretty significant impact on either your personal financial life or the financial lives of your heirs going forward. So I think there are a lot of benefits there. One quick thing that we didn't touch on is it's really important if you do Roth conversion that you're not paying the taxes from those traditional IRA or 401k dollars. You want to make sure that you have a taxable bucket, kind of that blue area that shows up in this graph. You want to make sure that you have a taxable bucket to pay the taxes from, because if you have to take out $1 to pay $1 taxes, but now that extra dollar is taxable, it's kind of like a double hit. So this is not a strategy for everyone, but it could be a good strategy for a number of people.
And one other point, Katie, too, you brought up a good point there. I think on the Roth conversion, there's no set amount that you can convert or that you have to convert. It's kind of what fits into your plan, your current situation, and how much additional tax you want to realize. So it's not like the contribution part where you're limited to your income thresholds and like $6,000 annually, which is indexed to inflation on an annual basis. So, I mean, like say like 50,000 works this year and you're able to have cash in the sidelines to pay that tax liability. Hey, it could be a good strategy, but maybe next year you don't have that available. Maybe you can do only 10,000. So it's kind of like a year-to-year basis, and it's something that we can design a strategy around.
Really good point. There are a number of factors that tie into this. And so it is something that if anybody is interested in figuring out if it's the right fit for them, we welcome that opportunity to take a look and see whether or not there are pieces of this strategy that can fit in either now or later or whatever the case may be. So we hope this gave everyone a good overview of Roth IRAs, the different tax buckets, the actual process of converting. Once again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. Until then, until next time, we hope that you enjoy the rest of your summer, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, John.
Thank you.